to people who view. So there's this sense of embodying this, not just knowing it, but actually possessing it, which I think is a little different. And it gives you more confidence. They were all subject to melancholy. That's an old word, melancholy, but today we'd say depression. They were all subject to depression. Johnson said he inherited his from his father. I don't know if that's true or not. But as you know, he went through breakdowns, depressions, struggles. Lincoln, obviously plagued by depression and melancholy. And Lincoln, some of Lincoln's favorite poetry was poetry about death. Poetry that had to do with mortality, or reflections on mortality. And Lincoln wrote a little poetry too. I don't know, are you reading any of the little poetry? He wrote a few ballads and things, and they're not bad, you know? They really aren't. But they're in part one of the rather sad reflection on the poverty of his growing up. Douglas Wilson's very good book, Honor's Voice, comes from the phrase in Gray's Elegy in a Country Churchyard. And Gray's Elegy is a poem that Lincoln knew extremely well, probably the most popular English poem of the 18th century. And when Lincoln was once asked what his youth was like, he gave a very simple answer. He said, "The short and simple annals of the poor," which is a line right out of Gray's Elegy. I mean, there isn't really too much to say. People struggled for existence. Their lives weren't very long, and they died, and now they're unknown. So there is this deep sense in all of Churchill's black dog. Now, Churchill was entirely different. Churchill was a man of enormous personal means. But Churchill suffered very severe bouts of depression. For various reasons, you can psychoanalyze it all you want, but the fact is he was depressed during significant parts of his life and constantly talked about keeping the black dog at bay. I think behind a lot of this depression is a sense of failure. A sense that given this great ambition, which I think the reason Lincoln recognized in Nelker is he had it himself. He was an incredibly ambitious person, enormously ambitious. And when you have that kind of ambition, you're going to think that you're failing. Johnson certainly thought that. Johnson did not put his name to anything he sold or wrote until he was 40 years old. That's a long time along in your life in the 18th century. And Churchill, thought in many respects he failed. Imagine Churchill in, 1937. What is he then? He's in his early 60s, thinking England's going down the tubes. He's no longer got the immediate prospect of any significant political office. Of course he's going to, think that his leadership has been a failure. So I think they're all subject to this. Churchill says, "We are so often mocked by the failure of our hopes," which leads to a sense of overcoming things, a sense of embattlement. All of these things, I think, help infuse them with a greater sense of sympathy. I don't think you can feel sympathy with others unless you have yourself, in many respects, struggled with a sense of failure and depression. And if things have been very easy and all the advantages have been given, it's unusual to find very deep sympathy in someone who has had a life in which there have been very few hurdles that have been high and none that have been so high that you trip over them. So insofar as they exercise this sense of sympathy or humanity, I think it's related to their own inner struggles, a sense of earned maturity and judgment. It's also something, they were all great talkers in one way or another. I don't know quite what that has to do with the prose style, but I think it has something to do with it. And Lincoln's talking was often not quite like his writing, nor was Johnson's or even Churchill's, but the fact that they were all wonderful talkers or storytellers or debaters or conversationalists means that somehow they were able to engage language at that time. And their wit, they talk about a wise, witty way, Masefield talks about Churchill, they all had wit. But the wit isn't just humor, though it's sometimes humor. Sometimes it's funny, and sometimes it's sarcastic. But the wit, to me, is not just happiness of language, it's also strength of mind. And the Old English verb witan really means intellection. It has to do with thinking about something. Now, of course, many of the examples of this are in personal repartee of some kind or another, you know. Someone saying to Johnson, so-and-so was a rather modest person, meaning it was a compliment, and Johnson said, yes, and has much to be modest about. I mean, you know, it's kind of turning something like that. Or, you know, Lincoln, after Gettysburg, said that General Meade couldn't shoot geese across a creek. It's fairly reductive. You know, couldn't make the pursuit. Or you've probably all heard the anecdote. It's a funny one though. Was it Shaw who sent Churchill 2 tickets for play and said, you know, here are 2 tickets for play. Bring a friend if you have one. And Churchill sent him back and said, can't go to your opening night. Send me 2 tickets for the second night if you have one. And there's this kind of this readiness, which is partially an attack and riposte, but it's partially, again, that habit of using language as a kind of weapon. They're rather humorous. I haven't talked much about religion, but I did want to say something about it and try to put on the table the thing which I find hard to understand. I'll try to explain it as best I can. Each one of these writers, and Lincoln, I think it comes explicitly to the fore, has a providential sense. What does that mean? What does it mean? It has a very deep historical and religious resonance in the Western tradition. Though we hesitate to use it today, in part because of separation of church and state is quite understandable, and in part perhaps because we think that politics is something entirely under our control, which each one of these 3 individuals recognized was completely false. Because they all recognize the enormous power that accident and uncontrolled and uncontrollable events holds in public life. And they say so explicitly. That it is meeting accident and contingency which is key. But it's this sense of providence. George Washington vowed that he believed in it. Lincoln vowed he believed in it. Churchill did. So what does that mean? It's a very puzzling thing to try to explain. And one way to look at it might be that there will come times when nations or peoples are involved in struggles that are particularly vital to their survival or particularly important to the well-being not only of themselves but of many others. And that these struggles are going to involve great injustice, perhaps despoilment or famine, even genocide. And right there you say, stop, there is no providence. There can't be with that. And that's a perfectly legitimate moral reaction, I think. There can't be. Yet if one holds to what these individuals seem to hold to, they do not mean a religious doctrine or article of faith espoused by one church. They mean something else. And they don't mean a fortunate or opportune divine intervention, a kind of deus ex machina. They don't mean that either. They mean something else. I think it comes out of a recognition that set in motion around us are forces that we may ride on or even ride out, but we can't really control. And that those forces, as time and accident conjoin, converge and collide, and they strain our power to direct them or even to foresee where they will end up. And we get ourselves into situations that we never would have wanted to be in.